I was clearing out my desk when Zachary Webb walked into my office like he owned the place, which technically he thought he did. The kid had this way of making an entrance, shoulders back, chin up, like he was walking onto a stage instead of into a manufacturing facility that had been running smoothly for 25 years. "Howard, pack it up. We need to talk. I'm Howard Brennan, 49 years old, and I'd been running operations at Hartwell Manufacturing for 22 years. Zachary had been CEO for exactly 8 months, 12 days, and about 6 hours. Not that I was counting or anything. I looked up from the box where I was placing my technical manuals, the real ones, not the digital version Zachary kept pushing on everyone. "What's on your mind, Zach?" "It's Zachary," he corrected, dropping a manila folder on my desk like he was serving papers. "And what's on my mind is this company's future. Specifically, your role in it. I'd been expecting this conversation for weeks. Ever since Walter Brennan passed away 3 years ago, no relation, just shared a last name and a lot of history, the board had been itching for what they called modernization. Walter had been my mentor, the man who hired me straight out of the Army and taught me everything about manufacturing. He'd also been the majority owner, though. The board seemed to think his shares had been distributed among various family trusts and charitable foundations after his death. They had no idea how wrong they were about that. Zachary stayed standing, which was his favorite intimidation tactic. He was 32, fresh out of Wharton, and he'd been brought in to revolutionize our operational paradigms. Those were his words, not mine. In my experience, when someone starts talking about revolutionizing paradigms, they're usually about to break something that was working fine. The board made a decision about restructuring operations, he said, using the tone he probably learned in some leadership seminar. We're moving toward full automation and AI-driven process optimization. We need leadership that can adapt to disruptive innovation. I checked my watch, a steel-cased field watch Walter had given me for my 10-year anniversary. The habit came from my Army days. Always know your tactical situation, including how much time you have to work with, and you figure I can't adapt. Zachary straightened his tie. Silk probably cost more than most of our workers made in a week. "Howard, you've been resistant to every digital initiative we've proposed. The blockchain supply chain tracking, the IoT sensor implementation, the machine learning predictive maintenance protocols. You're stuck in old school thinking." Old school thinking. That's what he called 22 years of experience maintaining the highest safety standards and most efficient production rates in our industry. That's what he called the knowledge that comes from actually understanding how manufacturing works instead of just reading about it in business journals. "I see," I said, adjusting my watch. The motion helped keep me calibrated when situations started running outside normal parameters. "So this is about my performance. This is about the company's future. We can't afford to have middle management blocking progress. The manufacturing sector is evolving, Howard. Companies that don't embrace technological disruption get left behind." I'd heard this speech before, or variations of it, usually from consultants who'd never spent a day on a production floor but had plenty of theories about how things should work. The irony was that I'd successfully integrated 4 major system upgrades during my time here. The difference was I'd done it without breaking what was already working. "What's the timeline?" I asked. He looked surprised, like he'd expected me to argue, or maybe beg for another chance. "That's not how we handled setbacks in the service. You assess the damage, adapt your strategy, and execute your next mission. HR has your severance package. Clean out your office by 5 p.m. Your access card gets deactivated at close of business." I stood up and extended my hand. "Appreciate the clarity, Zachary." He shook it, though he seemed confused by my calm response. I think he was hoping for more drama, maybe some emotional outburst he could use to justify his decision to the board. "Nothing personal, Howard, just business." As he walked out, satisfied with his little power play, I sat back down and opened the production report I'd been reviewing before he arrived. The numbers told a story that Zachary was either too inexperienced or too arrogant to read properly. Equipment downtime was up 31% since he'd started pushing rapid implementation of his digital systems. Worker satisfaction surveys showed declining morale across all departments. Our largest client had complained twice about delivery delays caused by system integration problems. 3 smaller clients had already started shopping around for more reliable suppliers. But Zachary's quarterly presentations to the board focused on digital transformation milestones and innovation metrics instead of actual operational performance. He was good at making changes sound impressive in PowerPoint slides. He was less good at understanding what those changes actually did to productivity and quality. I looked at the framed photo on my desk, Walter and me standing next to the new CNC line we'd installed in 2019. He was wearing that proud grin he got when a plan came together perfectly. We'd brought that line online 2 weeks ahead of schedule and 8% under budget. More importantly, we'd trained every operator thoroughly and had zero safety incidents during the transition. You always said patience was a strategic advantage, I said to the photo. What Zachary didn't know, what nobody in that building knew, except for a handful of lawyers and trustees, was that I wasn't just the operations director getting shown the door. 3 years ago, when Walter died, something had changed that would make this conversation look very different in hindsight. I started packing my personal items. Didn't take much, those technical manuals, the coffee mug my team had given me for my 20th anniversary, some maintenance logs I'd kept in my own handwriting because I didn't trust digital systems to store critical safety data, and that photo of Walter. The rest was just company equipment anyway. Outside my office, I could see the familiar bustle of the afternoon shift change. Danny Rodriguez was walking the floor, checking on his team like he'd done every day for the past 15 years. Danny ran line 3 with the kind of precision you don't learn in business school, the kind that comes from understanding every sound your equipment makes, every vibration that means something's about to go wrong before it actually does. He caught my eye through the glass and shook his head slightly. Word traveled fast in a manufacturing plant. The good news was that people like Danny knew the difference between leadership and management. The bad news was they were about to lose one and be stuck with the other. Eddie Foster from engineering stopped by his workstation and glanced over. Eddie had designed half our current tooling systems and could troubleshoot problems that left our expensive consultants scratching their heads. But Eddie was 54, which made him another dinosaur in Zachary's vision of the future. I walked out of that building the same way I'd entered it 22 years ago, minus quietly, with my head up, carrying my own gear. No drama, no speeches, no burning bridges. That wasn't my style, and more importantly, it wasn't necessary. As I reached my truck, I pulled out my phone and sent a text to George Hartwell, the family attorney who'd been handling Walter's estate. Time to execute the contingency plan. His reply came back in 45 seconds. Understood. I'll prepare the documentation. Can you be here tomorrow morning? See, 3 years ago when Walter died, I'd sat in George's wood-paneled office listening to the reading of the will. Most of it was standard stuff, charitable donations, personal items to longtime friends, some money set aside for scholarships. But then George handed me a sealed envelope. Walter was very specific about this. George had said, adjusting his glasses the way lawyers do when they're about to tell you something important. You're not to open it until you turn 49. Or until you believe the company is in immediate danger of losing its core values. His exact words. I'd turned 49 6 months ago, and watching Zachary systematically dismantle everything Walter had built while calling it innovation, I'd say the company's soul was definitely in immediate danger. I opened that envelope sitting in my truck in the company parking lot with the afternoon sun slanting through the windshield and the familiar hum of the plant's ventilation systems in the background. Inside was a letter in Walter's careful handwriting and legal documents with more official seals than a government contract. Howard, the letter began, if you're reading this, then something's gone wrong with the company we built together. I hired you fresh out of the Army because I saw something in you, not just technical skills, but integrity. You've never cut corners, never compromised on safety, never forgotten that a business is about people first, profits second. The board doesn't know this, but when I stepped back from day-to-day operations, I restructured my ownership in a way they wouldn't expect. 90% of my shares went into a trust with your name on it. You're not just an employee anymore, son. You're the majority owner. I know this comes as a shock, but I've watched you for 20 years. You understand what this company should be better than anyone else. The board will try to modernize us into irrelevance, bring in hotshot MBAs who think manufacturing is just another business model to optimize. Don't let them. I had to read that paragraph 3 times before it sank in. Walter had owned 90% of Hartwell Manufacturing, and now I did. The board, Zachary, all of them had been operating under the assumption that Walter's shares had been distributed among various family trusts and foundations. They had no idea that one person, a person they'd just fired for being resistant to change, now controlled the company's future. The legal documents confirmed everything properly filed, notarized, and airtight. George Hartwell had been managing the transition for 3 years, waiting for either my 49th birthday or what Walter had called a corporate emergency. Getting fired by some MBA who thought experience was a liability definitely qualified as an emergency. I called George that evening from my kitchen, looking out at the small garden my wife had planted before she passed away 2 years ago. The tomatoes were coming in nice this year. What's our timeline? I asked. I can file the shareholder meeting request first thing tomorrow morning. State law requires 72 hours notice for emergency sessions, but given the circumstances, we could have this resolved by Friday. Are you sure you want to move this quickly? George, they fired me because they think I'm too old to understand modern business. I'd say that qualifies as moving quickly enough. Fair point. What's your plan once you regain control? I watched a cardinal land on the fence post near the tomato plants. Same plan I've had for 22 years. Make sure this company builds quality products, treats its people right, and honors the values Walter established. You planning to take the CEO position? I adjusted my watch and thought about that for now, until I can find someone who understands that running a manufacturing company requires more than buzzwords and PowerPoint presentations. Thursday morning, I drove to George's office and signed the paperwork. The shareholder meeting request was simple and direct. Emergency session to address executive leadership performance and strategic direction inconsistent with company founding principles. By Thursday afternoon, every board member had received formal notification. The agenda was straightforward. Review current management effectiveness and consider necessary changes to executive leadership. Zachary called me that evening. His voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. Howard, I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but this shareholder meeting is completely inappropriate. You're no longer an employee of this company. You're absolutely right, I said. I'm not an employee, I'm a shareholder. See you Friday morning, Zachary. The silence on the other end of the line lasted about 10 seconds. What are you talking about? What shareholder? The kind that owns 90% of the company you just fired for being too old-fashioned to understand modern business. I hung up before he could respond. Some conversations are more effective when you let the other person fill in the blanks themselves. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that made you remember why you loved working with your hands. I put on my best suit, the same charcoal gray one I'd worn to Walter's funeral 3 years ago. Not for symbolism, just because it was the only one I owned that still fit properly. I arrived at Hartwell Manufacturing 15 minutes early and walked through the lobby like I'd done thousands of times before. The receptionist, Maria Santos, did a double take but didn't say anything. Maria had been here for 12 years and knew better than to ask questions when things were about to get interesting. The boardroom was already buzzing with conversation when I walked in. 6 board members, Zachary, the company lawyer James Porter, and Gloria Winters, the trustee who'd been quietly managing my shares for the past 3 years. I took the empty chair at the head of the table, right where Walter used to sit, directly across from Zachary. The conversation stopped like someone had hit a kill switch. Howard Board Chairman William Cross said, clearly confused, "I'm not sure why you're here, but this is a closed board meeting." "Actually, William," I said, placing a leather folder on the table. As the majority shareholder, I called this meeting. The silence that followed was like the moment right after you hear equipment break down. That split second when everyone knows something important just went wrong, but nobody's quite sure what it means yet. Zachary stared at the documents like they were some kind of elaborate practical joke. "This is ridiculous." Majority shareholder: "Howard, you're a middle manager we terminated yesterday for performance issues." I slid copies of the ownership certificates across the table to each board member. Walter Brennan transferred 90% of his shares to a trust in my name 3 years ago. The documentation is all there, filed with the state, notarized, and completely legal. James Porter, the company lawyer, grabbed his copy and started reading immediately. His expression went from skepticism to concern to something approaching panic in about 30 seconds. "These documents appear to be legitimate," Porter said quietly, like he was announcing a death in the family. "If they're valid, Mr. Brennan controls 90% of the company's voting rights." Angela Torres, who'd been brought onto the board for her financial expertise, was studying the trust documents with the kind of intensity she usually reserved for quarterly reports. "How is this possible? We were told Walter's estate was distributed among multiple beneficiaries." "That's what Walter wanted you to think," I said. He was concerned about the company's direction after he stepped back. He wanted to make sure someone with operational experience would be in position to protect his vision if necessary. Zachary's face was cycling through several different colors. "This is a personal vendetta. You're trying to sabotage the company because you couldn't adapt to modern business practices." "Let's talk about modern business practices," I said, opening the folder I'd brought with me. "Since you became CEO 8 months ago, equipment downtime is up 31%. Worker compensation claims have increased 41%. We've had 3 OSHA incidents that could have been prevented with proper safety protocols. Our 2 biggest clients have filed formal complaints about delivery delays caused by your new systems integration problems." I slid the reports across the table. "Real numbers, not projections or consultant recommendations. You told me yesterday that this industry is evolving. You're absolutely right. But evolution means successful adaptation, not just change for the sake of looking innovative. Your digital transformation initiatives have cost us productivity, safety metrics, and client confidence." William Cross was reading through the safety incident reports with a grim expression. Cross had been with the company since before I was hired, and he remembered when our safety record was something we were proud of. "These numbers are concerning," Zachary Cross said. Your quarterly presentations didn't reflect these operational issues. Zachary was scrambling now, using the kind of corporate speak that sounds impressive in meetings but doesn't actually mean anything. Those are temporary adjustment periods inherent in any major systems integration project. Every digital transformation involves short-term efficiency costs in exchange for long-term optimization gains. Howard's cherry-picking isolated incidents to support his personal agenda. I kept my voice level the way you do when you're dealing with equipment that's running hot and might blow if you're not careful. I spent 22 years building this company's reputation for quality manufacturing and workplace safety. You've spent 8 months treating that reputation like it's something to be optimized away. I stood up and walked to the window overlooking the production floor. You could see Danny Rodriguez explaining something to a newer operator, pointing out details on a piece of equipment. Eddie Foster was bent over a technical drawing with 2 other engineers, probably solving a problem that would have taken Zachary's consultants 3 weeks and $50,000 to figure out. You see those people down there? They know how to build products that last, how to maintain equipment properly, how to work safely and efficiently. But you've been treating their experience like it's worthless because they didn't learn it in business school. I turned back to face the table. Walter Brennan built this company on the principle that good people doing good work deserve leadership that supports them, not management that treats them like obstacles to quarterly profit targets. The room was quiet except for the steady hum of the building's HVAC system, equipment I'd helped specify and maintain, running efficiently because someone had taken the time to understand how it worked instead of just trying to automate it. As majority shareholder, I continued, I'm calling for a vote of no confidence in current executive leadership. The evidence shows that under this CEO's direction, our company has become less safe, less efficient, and less reliable for our clients. We need leadership that can balance innovation with operational excellence, not someone who thinks disruption is more important than actually making things work. Angela Torres had been taking notes throughout my presentation. What specific changes are you proposing? Effective immediately. I'm recommending removal of the current CEO and appointment of interim leadership focused on operational stability while we develop a long-term succession plan. The vote wasn't even close. William Cross, who'd initially supported bringing in young leadership, voted for the change after reviewing the safety reports. Angela Torres had seen enough in the financial data. Even Robert Hayes, one of the newer board members, couldn't argue with the operational failures documented in the reports. Zachary was out. As the meeting broke up, Gloria Winters approached me while the board members filed out, most of them still looking like they'd just witnessed a controlled demolition. So what's your plan now, Howard? I looked back out at the production floor through the boardroom windows. Same plan I've had for 22 years. Make sure this company builds quality products, treats its people right, and honors the vision Walter established. You planning to stay as CEO? I adjusted my watch and considered the question, for now. Until I can find someone who understands that running a manufacturing company requires more than digital buzzwords and PowerPoint presentations. Zachary had left without saying goodbye to anyone, which was probably for the best. He'd packed up his corner office in about 20 minutes and walked out to his BMW like he was already thinking about his next opportunity. That's the thing about people who think everything can be optimized. When one system fails, they just move on to the next one. Monday morning, I moved into Walter's old office. I didn't redecorate or bring in consultants or commission studies about optimal workspace utilization. I just started fixing the problems Zachary had created with his rush to modernize everything at once. First thing I did was halt the automated system installations until we could implement them properly. Not because I was against automation, but because rushing new technology into a working system without proper integration is like performing surgery with a chainsaw. You might get faster results, but you'll probably kill the patient. I reinstated the safety protocols that had been streamlined to save time. I met with every department head to understand what they actually needed to do their jobs effectively, not what some consultant's report said they should need. Most importantly, I went down to the production floor and talked to people. Danny Rodriguez, Eddie Foster, the machine operators, quality control technicians, shipping coordinators, everyone who actually made the business work day after day. It's not about going backward. I explained to Eddie during one of our planning sessions. It's about moving forward without abandoning everything we learned getting here. Eddie nodded and spread out the technical drawings for a new tooling system he'd been designing. Zachary wanted us to skip the testing phase and go straight to full implementation. Said the computer models were sufficient. Computer models are useful, I said, studying his sketches. But they don't account for everything that happens when you're actually running production. How long do you need for proper testing? 6 weeks to do it right. 2 weeks if we want to risk expensive failures later. Take the 6 weeks, we'll do it right. The changes didn't happen overnight, but they happened steadily. Equipment downtime decreased month by month. Safety incidents stopped entirely. Client complaints turned into compliments about improved quality and on-time delivery. 3 months later, we had our best quarter in 2 years. Not because we'd embraced some revolutionary new business model, but because we'd gone back to focusing on what we'd always done well, making quality products efficiently and safely. I kept Walter's photo on the desk where I could see it during meetings. Sometimes I'd catch myself checking my watch when I was working through difficult decisions, and I'd think about what he'd taught me. Patience isn't just waiting around hoping things get better. It's having the discipline to do things the right way even when people are pressuring you to take shortcuts. 6 months after the boardroom meeting, Zachary sent me an email. He'd landed a position with a tech startup that was developing manufacturing software solutions. He didn't apologize, but he did say he'd learned some things about the difference between innovation and improvement. I wrote back wishing him success and meaning it. The story spread through our industry pretty quickly. The operations manager who turned out to own the company that fired him. Some people called it the perfect revenge story, but revenge wasn't the point, and anyone who thinks it was missed the real lesson. Walter had trusted me with more than ownership documents. He'd trusted me with the responsibility to preserve something worth preserving in a business world that sometimes mistakes change for progress. A year later, I still check my watch when I'm thinking through difficult decisions. It's my way of remembering that the best solutions usually require patience, preparation, and the wisdom to know when the time is right to act. That lesson served me well in the Army, it served me well as an operations manager, and it's serving me well as the CEO of a company that Walter would still recognize. Some days I walk through the plant and see Danny training a new supervisor, or Eddie explaining a technical concept to a younger engineer. That's when I know we got it right. When experience and innovation work together instead of against each other. The manufacturing business is changing, and it should change, but change without wisdom is just chaos with better marketing. Real progress happens when you understand what's worth preserving before you decide what needs to be replaced. Zachary learned the hard way that firing someone isn't the same as getting rid of them, and I learned that sometimes the best way to protect what matters isn't to fight for it loudly, but to position yourself strategically and wait for the right moment to act. Looking back now, I understand that Walter didn't just leave me a company. He left me a lesson about the difference between power and authority. Power is what you take. Authority is what people give you because they trust your judgment. The kid thought he had power because he had a title and a mandate from the board to shake things up. But authority comes from proving that you understand the difference between innovation and destruction, between leadership and management, between running a business and actually knowing how it works. If you're reading this and you're over 45, working in an industry where experience matters, and feeling like the world is passing you by, remember this. They can fire you from a job, but they can't fire you from knowing how to do the work. Sometimes the best revenge is just proving you were right all along. And sometimes if you're patient enough and prepared enough, you get the chance to show them exactly how right you were. Don't let anyone convince you that experience is a liability. In a world full of people who know how to talk about work, be someone who knows how to do it.